trip around the country, huh? We've been to Colorado, and then we went north to Wyoming, and then we took a pit stop, because you need to take a pit stop on all road trips for a little patriotic sing-along. And then this week, we're heading back down south, right to good old Route 66 and the Petrified Forest National Park. Now, the name, the Petrified Forest National Park, that's a bit misleading. You see, the Petrified Forest National Park doesn't actually have a forest there. At least not right now. You see, back when this national park was deemed such in 1962, there was no forest present, but there had been one in the past. You see, there was a forest in this plot of land millions upon millions of years ago, back before even the dinosaurs walked the earth. What? There was a time before the dinosaurs walked the earth? There was. And in this place, there was a great forest. It was in the middle of all of the continents, because at that point in time, all of the continents were come together into one giant supercontinent called Pangea. And there were loads of living creatures of all varieties that lived in this forest. But then a giant environmental change began to happen. In fact, the continents began to split apart, and these giant trees that once created this forest fell in the floodwaters that came. These giant trees fell into the river beds, and they were buried down in the mud. And then, as all things happen with giant environmental change, there were volcanoes that erupted, and ash covered the face of the earth in this part of the world. And about 75% of the living creatures at that point were killed off. Now, eventually, the flood waters went away. And in these once mighty riverbeds were the remnants of these great trees. But the thing was, they had been transformed from wood into stone. And now we get to see these transformed stone trees in the Petrified National Forest. But the trees and all those creatures that lived in that late Triassic period aren't the only ones who have called this land home. No, for thousands of years there have been humans living in this part of what is now the United States. We see their remnants there by finding the pottery that they molded and the homes that they built out of the petrified stone. We also find cave dwellings and cave paintings, maybe like a little bit of prehistoric graffiti around the park. And I have to think that if Ezekiel were here and now, looking at the Petrified National Forest, he might think that he was looking out on another vision, like the one that God showed him of the dry bones. For today we hear once again how God showed Ezekiel a vision, and it was a valley filled with dry bones. Bones that had once been living, breathing creatures. And how in the midst of all of these dry bones that were once things that lived, Ezekiel must have seen that there was very little hope. These bones had once been God's people. These bones had once been the people that God had chosen. And God stands next to Ezekiel and he asks Ezekiel a question. He says to Ezekiel, "Can these bones live again?" Can these bones live again? And seeing what God is asking him, Ezekiel speaks out in faith and in trust. And he says, only you know God. God, hearing that, gives Ezekiel a very special job. He says to Ezekiel, tell the bones this, that is, prophesy over these bones, and tell them that I will bring you back to life. I will bring you back and put the connective tissues back where they were, recover you with flesh, and breathe my life back into you. That is, I will do for you what I did with Adam at the very beginning of time in Genesis. I will breathe my spirit into you. And Ezekiel does just this, and no sooner has he finished speaking, but the bones begin to move and shake and clatter, and they come back together, and the connective tissues form between them again, and the skin comes over them. And God says to these resurrected beings, I have risen you from the grave. I will breathe my life back into you. Ezekiel has seen the hopeless turn into hope. He has seen that which was once dead come back to life. Now, when we hear this vision that God has shared with Ezekiel, we have to remember that Ezekiel is living during a time in the Israelites' history known as the Babylonian exile. Now, the Babylonian exile is a time in which the kingdom of Babylon came in, they took over the area where the Jewish people had lived, and they brought most of them over into, well, the kingdom of Babylon. And they did this not to enslave them, but simply to reduce the number of people who might come together and to rise up against the kingdom of Babylon. What they did by doing this is they broke the people from their grounding, from that which gave them purpose and knowing who they were. And the writings that we have in Scripture from other prophets at this time speak of what the people are crying out, which is, how long, God, until you will restore us to our rightful place? How long, God, will it be until you breathe your breath back into us? Ezekiel is ministering to a people who have forgotten who they are and why they are here. He is speaking and ministering to a people who have no life within them. And so as we hear this story of the dry bones, we remember that God has promised that he will breathe life into that which seemingly has no hope. And it might be hard for us to think, what does this look like in the here and now? It might be hard for us to imagine what those people were going through in the kingdom of Babylon who had been removed from their grounding and their purpose. But maybe it's not as difficult as we might think. You know, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn when I say that the United States has had a very, very difficult year when it comes to weather-related tragedies. I mean, we started out with the fires in LA. We've moved through a bunch of other things. We've had, just even this past couple of weeks, the flash flooding down in Texas. And it might be shocking to even think back all the way to last September when Hurricane Helene came through the southeastern United States. Well, the people in western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee are still rebuilding from that devastation. And one of the groups that has come in and helped to bring hope in a hopeless situation is one that you might not expect. It's the Amish. The Amish have come and have stayed in western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee over these past many months. They've come especially into a town called Chimney Rock. You may have seen it on the news coverage when the hurricane was happening. The town was all but wiped out when the broad river breached its banks and wiped through the town. The Amish have come in, and they have slowly rebuilt buildings, but they have also put in insulation and, ironically, installed electrical wiring throughout this town. But not just that, they've cleaned up the campground of Chimney Rock State Park, a basis of a lot of the tourist culture in that town and the economy. They've organized the donated supplies, and they have brought life back into this small town. A different group of Amish came last fall, 62 of them, in fact, for just 48 hours. They came to the city of Boone, North Carolina, and in that 48 hours, they built 12 tiny homes. 62 people and 12 tiny homes in 48 hours, providing a place for the people to live during the winter that was better than a tent when they could no longer afford to continue living in the hotels. The Amish, who are known for keeping to themselves and keeping to their own kind, have come in and brought life back to these small, holler areas, come back and rebuilt these towns, brought hope into the hopelessness. And it might be easy to think that God only works in those situations where there has been absolute devastation and utter damage. But God works even in the still, small, quiet ways, bringing hope to the hopeless in our own backyards. It makes me think about what we're doing in the back of Fellowship Hall, setting up that free market storefront. We are creating a space where not only can those in need come and get what they need, but that more is happening, where relationships will be built, where people will be able to develop skills, where we will be able to welcome students from Chesterton High School to help and grow this way, to bring God's goodness to all who need it. A place where hope can be found even in the most hopeless situations. And we might think that, going back to the petrified forest, that in this desert landscape there is no life. It's just a reminder of the life that had once been with these stone logs and these cave dwellings and cave art. But even in the midst of all of this, there are new plants taking root, new wildlife living abundantly. There is life in Petrified Forest National Park. It is simply in ways that we do not expect. And God brings life not only there, but in each and every one of our own lives. We simply must look for it and find the ways that it is sprouting forth, ways that God continues to breathe His Spirit into each of us. And God does this, not just for us, but for all of His children.